Howdy, hi, folks. So today it's the turn of ISFP, FIS. So then, yes, so this does not equal Socionics ESI. In Victor Galanka's book, this one, Psychological Types, that I had a that's not right. Yeah, exit full screen. Right. That I had a little bit of involvement with. So this book, the harmonizing subtype is the closest to ISFP, but it's not a match. So it really is tricky with the sensory introverts in trying to match them across to sort of like the Keirsey types. Like, I mean, the SEI normalizing does, it's like ISFJAF. But the other ones. Anyway, back on topic. With this type, I'm going to be talking a lot about Patterson, because like he's a screenwriting guru, and I've read like not screenwriting, Robert McKee, songwriting guru, and I've read sort of 3 or 4 of his books, and I think I can use him as an example of any allergic, any Achilles heel. And I sort of use John Grinder as an example of any Achilles heel for ISTP. And so I'll get onto that later on about Patterson. So he sort of fits the predisposed role of the composer. And he's also a bit philosophical as well, is Pat. So let's just start off with the function. So you can see the subfunctions there, you can read. And we've got that first slot, that it's a valued function, and that it's a default function. So meaning it's an introverting function within an introverting type. And it's a club function, meaning it's one of the SF functions. And so I'll talk about that at the moment. I can talk about like sort of like the roles and that lot, because you get that with FI and SE. So what I would say is the sort of primary difference between, from a function point of view, but if we're going to compare ISFP and INFP, the big thing to look at first is artisan versus idealist. And a sort of a functional correlate there is like you've got with the INFP, the accommodator, idealist. That's any auxiliary and SE Achilles heel, whereas ISFP is SE auxiliary and any Achilles heel. So there's a sort of a difference in how they view ethics. So I would say it is more situational. Even it's in like the situational row, but like SE is very, very situational. But they'll probably react in a similar way. But because artisans are about being situational. And so let's get on to SE, and then I can sort of like give the function version and then sort of like how it sort of works together. So much more, so these sort of features of SE, very much situational, which means the here and the now. And so the ISFP is going to have the feelings about the here and the now, and they're going to do less. And because they're concrete rather than abstract, and because they don't have that, they have very weak NE, they're not going to have these sort of like a complex absolutist ethical system that goes across many contexts. It's going to be very sort of like situation specific. Now, here's the rub though. In a particular situation, ISFP is like, don't make an ISFP angry because they have that extroverting sensing, and they could think like if they take umbrage in the moment, they can be like that cat that turns if they are sort of like annoyed enough. Yeah, so I remember someone saying that she was on a nursing course that the ISFP nurses objected strongly when the teacher, who was from another culture, said that, oh, it's the woman's fault for getting raped. And they just a strong pushback from the ISFP nurses. Right, so in a moment, instinctive reaction, they will show it with the SE, with the FI and the SE. So here's the thing. You get a little bit of an influence from the whole pattern on how functions are sort of used, because like temperament and interaction style has to do with like essential motivators. It's like that's like the horse, and the functions you can sort of see as the buggy or the cart rather. But you can also say, but Ben, functions have values associated with them. So wait a minute, where am I going with this? Oh yes, so ISFP is an accommodator. So in my opinion, so at the whole type level, they're an accommodator. And so I would look at that and I'd think, okay, if we're going to then try and then categorize their behavior, and then I'd say, okay, they're doing a lot of accommodator. So it's likely, highly likely, that they're going to be using, say, the harmonizing subfunction of SE more than the assertive subfunction of SE, which is more the realm of ESTP. The ESTP being an initiator. And if we think about it, like ISFP is like, you get like, in terms of Enneagram fixation, you can have like 4, 6, and 9. Right? And frequently there can be all those three. And ESTP is Enneagram 8 fixated. So you can see how the 8 will draw on assertive SE. So these are sort of like ways of sort of like bringing things together. Also, I would say for ISFP, and this is actually for all the people out there, there's a lot of like from the MPs, a lot of bias about, MP is associated with creativity. You get a lot of this from the ENTPs on YouTube. That will like, and there's one called Eric, I won't mention the surname, who like will talk about, ENTPs are the most creative type and ISFPs are useless. Well, hang on a minute. Let's look at ISFP, which is frequently an Enneagram 4 fixated. Like the only ones who are going to be caught for are like idealists and ISFP. If we look at the number of idealists who are creative, Prince, Prince, David Bowie, I'm not so sure ISFP or INFP. Noel Gallagher, I think Noel doesn't get on well with his ESTP brother, Liam. Noel Gallagher, ISFP, Paul McCartney, ISFP, Bob Dylan, ISFP. So what I'm sort of saying here is, and this is where I'm going to talk about Pat Patterson, because it's like the other side of the NE, is that Pat Patterson is talking about prosody, where everything sort of works together. And he gave an example in one of his writing books of what he thought was a bad song. And it was like a song written by an NFP, where it talked about where each sort of verse was about something bad happening in a different part of the world. And for him, I get the impression he did not like that, because it was going all over the place and it wasn't sticking with a central theme. And so the way he wants prosody and the way that a song should be really integrated is that he talks about, but he went like this: stability and instability. No, he should have done it like this: stability and instability. That's in his, like, one of his videos. But the point is, so for example, if you get in a part in a song where it's like the feelings are a little bit unstable, then the rhyme types should be unstable, meaning less than a perfect rhyme, maybe going towards consonance rhymes and assonance rhymes. Consonance rhyme would be the extreme. Additive subtractive times in the middle, and then you've got family rhymes and then the perfect rhymes. And so when you get an instability, you would have more of these sort of like less than perfect rhymes to make the person, the listener, feel a little bit more unstable. And then the line lengths would be unstable as well. And so you see there, he's got all of these different elements working together, to all the elements working together, that prosody, that integration. And that is a benefit, whereas, so it's like that goes with the ISFP and the ISTP wanting everything integrated together. And that can be good, say, in a song. Whereas the NE is looking at, say, connecting lots of different ideas. But for the ISFP, that's apples and oranges. You're going all over the place. So I'll get on to NE disdain later on. So something I noticed in Keirsey about, although these are split differently with the concrete types, where when we've got for the abstract types, we've got the NTs and the NFs, and they match the clubs. But Keirsey didn't do SF and ST. He did SP and SJ. And that's because of the importance, just how fundamentally important SE and SI are, and how different they are. And I'll get onto that soon. Is that in the cut on the? It will come up. So, but if we look at this within the Keirsey theory, like, so he's got the SP as best at tactics and second best at logistics. So, and not so bad at strategy, because you could have maybe an ISFP writer, like you could do a lot of design if it's a novel. But the point, let's talk about logistics. So, especially, and this goes back to the, what did I say before? ISFP nurses. And Carol Linden mentioned a friend of hers, ESFP. But the kind of nurse she was and the kind of nursing she likes is like emergency room under pressure. Good under pressure. So what we got there is a little bit of a consistency there with Keirsey, with, say, ISFP being able to do these tactical roles, but also do these roles, these SF roles as well, but within the logistical intellect. Especially, I would say, protector. So it's like women said before, you can get the SFP nurse. And by their behavior, if you look at female nursing students, like, you probably think, yeah, a lot of those are SFPs. They like to have fun. So that ESFJ would be furthest away. So there is sort of something there with the clubs. The STJ rolls are going to be far away, harder for ISFP to enact. Right, so I'm going to try to make this distinction in every single video, in that people misunderstand Keirsey. They think that Keirsey is talking in stereotypes when he names the type, the promoter, the craft, the performer. No. Those are roles. The type is different from the roles. Now, I've sort of used some sort of Keirsey ideas to sort of come up with my own names to make the distinction clear. So, for instance, in personology, he would have called the type that enacts the accommodating composer. He called it something like the tactical accommodator. And I'm like, even that is not nice, because it's like you've associated the type with a particular intellect. No, they are separate ideas, because these intellects are like Keirsey's versions of the function, but what it really correlates to are function pairs. So, for example, protector there, SI with FE, caring for other people. And then you got FI and SE with composer. And then you got expediency with SC and TI, where it's like, do it your own way in this specific situation. The sort of ends justify the means sort of thing. But what that means is, in a situation where you've got to get something done quickly and you've got to think quickly, STP is the best in that situation. So you're in like if you got the tasks like fighter pilot or surgeon, STP is the right one to go to, because of the calmness under pressure and actually stimulated by pressure. The problem they have is being bored when that pressure is not around. But getting back to ISFP, and what I'm trying to say here is that, so this difference between SE and SI, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about SI. I'll put SI on, and then I'm going to, you see, I don't want to forget about it. So if you take that in, about these core features of SE, where again, it's like, what would Keirsey write about artisans? In the moment. The place is here, the time is now. In this present context, as Dario wrote the chapter for SE in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, immersing in the present context. So that then correlates to uptime, and NLP was created by a couple of STPs, ISTP John Grinder and ESTP Dr. Richard Bandler, not really a doctor. There's a promoter for you. And then in time, here and now. So like those two ideas from Socionics, NLP, correcting myself there. Those describe key features of SE, as opposed to NI, which is more concentrated inwards and about through time. So that's how SE and NI are opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make to sort of like put some bones on this, like default and situational. Put some bones on it. No, put the meat on the bones. Maybe say the skeleton is already there. This is it. And actually, so I don't forget, this is the intuition stuff. So I've got to remember that. Shift 8 and Shift 7. Right. Oh, I'm back. Useless. It's supposed to be nifty shortcuts. Anyhow, I'm waffling on. But I'll try and get some. So we're describing these two. So I'm going to sort of like explain these blocks. Where I was talking about, you got the club functions, the SF functions. Hope you can see that. So if you want to pause that, I'll get on to slot 3 soon. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on these blocks, and then you can pause it. And then just going to do all of these so you can see them later on. So the B side's going to be NI and TE in NI and TE, the B side functions in ISFP, and the disdained functions are going to be TI and NE. But here's the thing, ISFP can get into a mode where they act a bit INTP-ish. This is social benefit rings. This is something that Kristen has observed in her teaching. Right. That's when I get onto that slot later on, about the tertiary NI. Now, from an EEG point of view, they're getting to like that starburst pattern, apparently, when they're being creative. I think Dario said that it's harder for ISFP to be creative than like it takes more effort for them to be creative versus INFP, and it tends to be more visual, their creativity, which makes sense as a concrete type. Oh yeah, something that Patterson would go on about is like sensory bound language. So you can see the concrete preference there. So INFP would probably be better at metaphor, because like perception of similarities is key in creating metaphors, according to the translations of Aristotle that we have. I'm gonna. Oh, did you see those other ones when? Because I had that thing across. So you may not have seen it very well. Right, so now I'm going to get on to actually explaining default and situational. So within the introvert, which ISFP is, let's go here. Make it really big. So that one's experience of default mode is more nuanced and practiced than one's situational mode. The default operating mode is introverting. You can introvert without an external stimulus, e.g. whilst reflecting. And one can introvert, i.e. subjectify an outside stimulus by placing more attention on the subjective reaction to the stimulus rather than the empirical aspect of it. Again, subjectifying. And then what Jung wrote about introverting. There's a key bit there that sort of shows like that bit there. Everyone whose attitude is introverted thinks, feels, and acts in a way that clearly demonstrates the subject as a chief factor of motivation. Okay, another way of putting that is everyone whose attitude is introverted, TIs, FIs, and SEs in a way that clearly demonstrates the introverting. So telling because it means actions and feelings in a TI DOM will often be subjective introverting. Another way I might say is that the actions and the thinking in the FI DOM will also be subjective. Right, I'm not going to read it all out. And then there's something there about, that laws of logic are different from TI, which is why you can have an INTP and an ISFP, like individual sort of representatives of those types, where the INTP can have better TI than the ISFP, but that ISFP might have a higher logico-mathematical IQ. Now, this is not going to... Now, on average, the average INTP is going to have a higher mathematical logical IQ than ISFP, because in the way that INTP is using their TI, it relies on the laws of logic, and so it gets trained up. It's just like someone who does a particular kind of puzzle and they get better and better and better at it. So the thing is but you do get these people with a feeling preference who can have Mensa level logico-mathematical IQ. So I'm talking 150 plus. It's just that, like I said, TI will draw on reason because TI relies on reason, whereas TE relies more on the facts. And so TI sort of works where it's like how internally consistent it is. That's sort of, or rather, that's not TI in essence. That is what is used to sort of validate the TI by sort of saying, yes, but my argument makes sense. It's internally consistent. You can't find a fault with my argument. But the subject, so a TI argument is frequently based on subjective premises. That's where the subjective part is, but it's internally consistent. But another process is coming in to aid in that internal consistency, and that is the power of reason. So it's a different but related process. Now we have the situational row about and it gives an example of how extroverting works in the introvert. Now, what I will admit to is that ISFP and ISTP sort of appear to do more extroverting than other introverts, because ESI as a function, you could almost argue, I think it might be fair to argue, that ESI is the most extroverting function, in that it's about placing all of your attention in uptime and in time on the empirical data, and its opposite, NI, is the most introverting function. The most introverting. It's so introverting that people can't even really think about it. It's sort of like much more related to the unconscious. So you can frequently have, say, ISFPs and ISTPs act in a way where it's like, if you looked at their behavior, it's like, whoa, they're doing a lot of extroverting. So, but maybe it's about balance. So, for example, you might have an EN type who, it depends what the kind of activities we sort of tag as sort of like extroverting or introverting. So, for example, and what aspects we look at. So when they used to have those the painters from the sort of the Romanticism era, where you would paint somebody in a landscape, and maybe that might be like something like ISFP, ISTP, where it's like the person that is out in the wilderness, and you have I'm not going to read through that. You can see that the person who's out in the wilderness and they're alone, but they're within all of this sort of like all this SE stimulation around them. And it's like with those, just like those paintings of landscapes by Turner. If you look at the landscapes of Turner, and it's like trying to sort of like and showing stuff and mood from, say, the clouds in the sky and it's dark and thundery, and that kind of the romanticism of sort of like losing oneself in the elements. Yet this is the person who is alone within all that sensory stimulation. And that might be, when you look at that, like you've got somebody who is alone with their thoughts and their feelings, like FI, but they have all this stimulation of this wonder and environment around them. So that might be like some of the kind of like introverting that you can get from ISFP and ISTP, even when they're out there in the world and being sensorially stimulated. So I'll try to sort of look up an image of that to sort of try and get across sort of what I mean by this. Turner landscape, and see if there's any sort of like pictures with like an individual sort of lost in the landscape and sort of like taking it all in. There we go. There might be one. Right. So this is a bit of a cliche as well as like the ISFP artist. Oh, you beast. Right. There's one with Turner. Is it Turner with Storm? I better put something else on screen. Boy. I'll put SI on, because this is related to SI actually, because it's like a bit of SI. Let's get a bit of SI and a bit of SE, because again the subjective reaction to the experience, the subjective reaction to the sensory experience. There's a particular painter, Storm, shit. Oh wow. Sort of like, oh wow. It's some like powerful. Oh, you're based. Is it? What's that? J.W. Turner. Yeah. There's just one where it's like, or I might put in landscapes romanticism. This is where like the SI is like coming in as well. Right. There we go. That like, what have we got here? Have we got like the one person? I mean, are there other people there? Sort of, but we really see the one person that's highlighted in the environment. Well, I'm gonna have to I have to save some of these images, and then I'll sort of get back to you. Right, event prep. So what is it? Yeah. Objective personality. No, rubbish those. Right, another subscriber lost. Vit. whiteboards, on own, IS types, FISX. No, we're supposed to .jpg. Save. Try and find a good one. Right, there we go. That's a good one. See a kind of combination of the senses and feeling that we get sort of conveyed in these landscapes. And it's frequently in these images, it's the landscape and then one person. Right, I'm gonna right, I don't know if it's right. I'm just gonna show what I have so that you know perfection is, because I sort of like come up with this. See this, like yes, there's a little kid there, but like usually it's like one person on its own, lost within the landscape. And so you can get a lot of like SI and FI and sort of subjective reactions just from like the clouds and sort of like the feelings and emotions that's coming off the image. Right. Oh, there's a really good one of a sort of like a storm at sea, sort of a lifeboat. So I'm going to try once again to try and find something like it's a like Turner lifeboat, something like that. Bloody hell. Painting. There's a really good one out there where it's like when most of the ship is on so what is the fascination with the storm and the environment and the elements? I can't find the one that I want. It's really tough. But you're not going to be able to see it. Maybe I'll post it later on in the but these sort of like elements. And so like ISFP can sort of want to lose itself in the element. So it's weird, like you've got extroverting and it's where it's like it's introverting because it's like the person lost amidst all this stimulation and their sort of subjective reaction to it. And so it goes towards this kind of like wow, very imaginative kind of, but really it's no, it's more the core subjective, not really the core, but it is like the subjective part of sensing that you're getting with that. So it's like that's the sort of way I see maybe like the introverting, and like they do like to like maybe it's like from an American point of view, the like the ISFP that sort of likes to sort of like just walk or travel or drive on their own and lose themselves in a sort of a desolate environment with not many people around, where they can be alone with their own thoughts and feelings whilst getting that sensory stimulations. Maybe it's like they find themselves whilst they're out there in the environment. Maybe there's a similar thing in Australia, because this sort of thing of like going walkabout. Yeah, so someone going on a long trek on their own and sort of like discovering themselves. So I'm really sort of pushing it now, and I'm going to go on to the next one. So yeah, all the SI stuff. So this about guardians, and that frequently ISFP is going to use imaginative SI. I won't say better, but it's sort of like it's put out there more in a sort of professional realm because it fits the temperament and like the artisan temperament. And it's just as I've written there, many imaginative guardians are frequently uncreative as a profession. Later on, I maybe like write poetry on it. It's very hard to make a living as a poet. Not many best-selling books on poetry, books of poetry on books of poetry rather. But ironically, probably the highest paid writing per line is songwriting. So songwriting all the way up here and poetry all the way down there. Right. And so what I can say looking at this is that the SI is being used to serve the needs of FI and SE. Maybe the needs of the type ISFP going towards that predisposed role, the composer. I remember from an Enneagram point of view, it's like the only ones which are going to be core 4 fixated are idealists and ISFP. So if you're an ISFP and you're core 4 fixated, there's going to be a predisposition there towards music and art. So, and that's going to draw the art, probably draw on the SI. Probably on the NI as well, but we'll sort of get there later. So yeah, it's like, maybe it's like ISFP fish. I mean, like, if it knew about typology, doesn't know when it's using SI. The ISFP fish doesn't know it's worked with SI. Although, yeah, it's like the subjective sensory reaction. And Patterson going on about object writing, and also about how it's different for each person, because each person's got like, so that subjectifying aspect. I don't want to get the book. I could get the book out where, like, his book writing better lyrics, and he does talk about like that it's different for each person reading that, and just real sensory bound writing where you're really getting into not just the sights but the sounds and the textures and there's in the kinesthetic, and kinesthetic's very bound up with emotion as well, kinesthetic. So, and then there's other ones like performer being next. So it's like the musician who then like, well, you got to, if they want to play it, also the performer, and then lower, and then promoters last, and it's last because of the interaction style differences, where that's an extroverting role, or rather, and it's not really direct. Well, maybe directing, of course. I mean, but like ESTP though is furthest of the artisans. ESTP is furthest away from ISFP because it's got bad FI, and it's directive, and it's extroverting. But they both like value freedom. In the case of ESTP, it certainly values its own freedom and not necessarily the freedom of others, depending on how Enneagram 8 fixated it is. Oh yes, I'll say something about this, like about what is most important. So we can see that why this is the first slot. It ticks 3 boxes. This ticks 2 boxes, and this ticks 2 boxes. So it looks, what I've done here is, in this arrangement, it sort of acknowledges, and this is what the data would show, Dario Nardi's data, is like, So it's like, it looks like, even though I make a big deal of like default and situational, it looks like valued trumps default. It trumps default. But here, you've got two here. You've got valued and default. But here, club trumps valued. So what it is, the most important, and because Dario's data would show like the club functions are the strongest. So it's like the most important of these factors is club, then it's valued, then it's default. So, and that goes in line with the data. Let me show you the data. So the data would be here. So the paragraph above that is about the tricycle formation, where it would be like, say for an ISFP, they would actually score high on SI. But it depends like how much, like I would say certain kinds of SI that are not like too guardian-y, like certain subfunctions of it, because they are very much opposed. But I would think like the harmonizing subfunction about health and all stuff like that, like Imogen on the channel, like very much into nutrition, like a big focus on health with ISFP and ISTP. Maybe less so with ISTP, but like they're sort of aware of it, yeah. Because that SE can be very much out there and adrenaline focused and ignoring of the SI. It depends in the moments, like with adrenaline. So this is from Dario. This is the data from the Keirsey Cognition cognitive assessment, Keirsey Cognition website cognitive assessment. It's there. This suggests that pairs of functions such as sensing thinking, so ST, SF, NT, NF are highly relevant. So those are the clubs. You can see that. So getting back to FI, it's bad that I've been like all over the place. My apologies, like for people watching this who are any allergic. I apologize. But so I can talk about this backseat driver where, so yeah, they are sort of like, you could also say with these positions, SI and FE, that they're sort of high in information, but they're not valued, especially FE. Like ISFP is, with FE, they're going to be able to read affect display very well. But they can pick up the atmosphere in a room. I mean, with the sensing preference, sensory instincting preference, and the extrovert, they can pick up, but it's like they're going to go, but I mean, they're not always going to clash, but if there's a clash, they're going to go with their FI. And so it's like the metaphor of the backseat driver is that voice in the back of in the back seat, like they're aware of it, they have that input, that information, but at certain times are going to ignore the sort of the compulsions of FE, whereas the opposite, the FE dom, will ignore FI, but are going to be sensitive to FE information. This is why you're not going to get like ISFPs that act like INTJ. Like ISFPs are going to be considerate of other people's feelings. It's just that when the rubber meets the road and there's a clash, ISFP is going to stand up for itself, even if it causes a scene. But in general, I would also say with that, also with INFP, again, look at the whole type level, because INFP has FE in that slot 4. And at the whole type level, we observe that INFP and ISFP is what Linda Bones would call behind the scenes, and what Keirsey would call responsive accommodation. Learn ISFP is an accommodator artisan. To me, that's the real type. The accommodator artisan has ISFP preferences, and in functions it correlates to FISX. But I would call the actual type the accommodator artisan, because the artisan temperament exists. Like, you talk to people, you get it's like, okay, those are the motivations of the person. That's real, that's psychologically real, and that's how they interact. If you see them across enough situations, okay, their default sort of interaction style is accommodating. Right. But if you push them too far, they can turn. That's why, like, it's like the cat that's demure, and then it turns and bears its claws. Right, so performing arts, maybe a little bit. I think, oh, another example of ISFP, there's another old reference, maybe Kim Wilde. Yeah. I remember her father saying in an interview, because I thought ISFJ for her, because like she was into gardening. She became a gardening sort of celebrity, Kim Wilde. I remember her father saying, like, do not ever lie to her, and she gets really angry if you like lie to Kim, and them saying that she valued her independence as well. So that's interesting. So it's like, okay, there's those traits in there, ISFP for Kim Wilde. And amazing eyes as well. If you see a Kim Wilde music video, amazing eyes. Right. Yeah, so it's sort of like they've not really got the energy for it, FE. It's not valued. It's not valued. But they're aware of that FE information. Right? You know, ISFP is not a rude type. INTJ can be rude because they've got FE there. So let's get on to NI. This interests me. Frequently, you can get ISFPs with some wicked strong NI to such an extent. This is what frequently happens. ISFPs, because E.S.I is not like ISFP, a lot of Keirsey ISFPs will get typed as an IEI, a NIF, a intuitive ethical introvert in functions NIFE in Socionics, or rather TE, or rather like time and emotions in Socionics. And that type, Victor Galenka calls that type the lyric, but that means lyric poet. It's a particular kind of poetry in, I suppose, Russian and Ukrainian. So it's harder for them to access it, but get into that sort of like maybe starburst pattern. But ISFP can access NI, but they're not going to be in it as much as INFJ. Why? Because they have that preference for the concrete. They have that sensory instincting preference. Like I said, they maybe lose themselves in the environment, going a long walk, going a long journey. So in America, maybe where they can go and drive through a desert, be completely on their own. I don't know, flog that horse. Flogging a dead horse there. I've made the point. So yeah, they can do, especially if they're a 4. And someone like Shannon on the channel would get typed as II in Socionics. Yeah. And I actually think that Sana on this channel could arguably be ISFP rather than INFJ, because I did this video with her where it's like, I called it something like Outlier Sana, where she was talking about, oh, in MBTI I'm INFP, but in Socionics I'm IEI. And she sort of gave her rationale for why she is INFP. And it's like, that is a big difference, because like INFP pretty much detests SE. And I think, like, and it's not just because she paints, but I think that she could, like, an ISFP 4. An ISFP 4 will think they're an idealist. They will, because the 4 is very much concerned with identity. So, and you can get sort of like maybe subtypes of ISFP. You can get very creative ISFPs, one of the most creative types, and they'll get mistyped as an intuitive. Like I said, Bob Dylan. What is, so it's like dabbling, it's like how much energy there is for it. They have got that sensory preference there. Oh yeah, so yeah, as I showed before, I think I showed that again, downtime and through time for NI. But yeah, the ISFP4, they can also have a bit of a shift towards INTP in certain. What I mean is, there's an overlap between the predisposed roles. If you think of the roles where you've got ISFP predisposed to the role of composer, and you've got INTP predisposed to the role of designer. Well, composing and designing are not so far removed, especially if we sort of like give an example of, well, if you've got the songwriter and what has to be done in a song by a composer, the composer of the song, and thinking sort of maybe tactically just in this sort of song. But if we then take an ISFP who's writing a novel, well, they've got to think more strategically, because it's all the structure of the plot and the plot mechanics and all that to work out. So there you've got someone that's enacting a role that's somewhere between composer and designer. Because there is a hell of a lot of design. But my approach to writing is very sort of like strategic and designing. A lot of designing in steps. So where I would think, where don't do day in the life. No. Do 30 previous days in the life of the character before they entered the scene. Because that 30 days will capture most of the things that particular character does, especially an extrovert. Especially if that extrovert does lots of different things. Day in the life is not good enough. And then also working out all the character dimensions across 4 levels. And then you get 10 categories of contradiction. So I do it in a very like methodical, strategic way. And like you can like working out all the plot and all that. So you can see there's an overlap between the roles of composer and designer. Again, and getting the plot design right. There you go, plot design. Or what was it, Greek word mythos, the plot structure. So, right then. But then there's also that part of writing that is more like drawing on FI. So there's a difference in emphasis. So again, yeah, that the B side, the B side of ISFP is NI and TE. This is why they're in the gamma quadra, because those are like the main, those are the wheelhouse functions of the NTJs. Oh yeah, and so the jewel of ISFP is ENTJ. Now, one ISFP said to me, before she got annoyed and then blocked me. Although she did interrupt a lot, like, and then Jeff was in an event with her, and it's like, well, she did a lot of interruptions, just like wouldn't stop. But one of the interesting things she said to me, this is not personal information, but like it's such a good. She shouldn't have blocked me if she didn't want me to say it. Is that, and this is typology related rather than personal, is that she said that she gets on well with ENTJs because they said that they don't have to guess how she feels. She just says how she feels. And that's sort of like honesty. So it's that valuing of FI where like FI is an inferior function for ENTJ, and the ENTJ doesn't want to spend a lot of time guessing about what someone is feeling. And the ISFP will just show how they feel in the moment to the ENTJ. And it's like, oh, thank you very much, up to the chase. It's like, and they respect that. They don't want to like, because ENTJs, from that point, I don't want to waste time guessing someone's feelings and mind reading them. It's just give them the FI information straight away. Just like, so it's like they appreciate that. You know, so that was a sort of real life example. Yeah, I added to the TE. I have a new slide for TE. Because I had some more input from Kristen, a creative ESTJ, creative subtype. She is creative in the way she uses TE. What I'm going to do is I need to go to the folder, the VIT folder for integrated typology, functions, single functions, TE. What I should do is I should put that in all the videos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on screen, and then I'm going to, so that's the new and improved TE description, and the bit there where I've added a quote from Kristen. I'm just going to put that in there because I'm going to be, I don't want to redo all these graphics. I've got 5 more types to do after this. ES types. Link. So you can see there the creative part of TE. And I can imagine that ISFP might be more likely to use that if they're like an Enneagram 4. And I think, yeah, pragmatic compromising, looking for consistency between facts. I can see like ISFP going towards that as an accommodator because there's an overlap between accommodating and harmonizing. Less likely to use assertive. Some practical thinking in the way with sort of like overlapping with the artisan temperament. Yeah, but it's an inferior function for ISFP. Oh, am I on this one? It's an inferior function. Oh, is that going to crash? I hope not. No. So, and they're hot for it, and with help and admire that in other people. So yeah, so that's this soul image. The soul image of ISFP is ENTJ, TENI, or TENX. TENX. So now on the contrarian alternative, this can be quite strong in ISFP. And then just think about when I gave the example of composer, and if they're writing a note, like they've got to do some structural stuff that is not necessarily that is associated with TI. All right, now I can say stuff about what's going on with TI, where because it's And it's also this sort of like rational elaboration into a system is more how NTPs use TI. STPs are using TI, or maybe into like a tactical system, like a betting system. But NTPs are using TI to solve problems in front of them in the here and now. Read a situation, think on their feet. Whereas the reason why Socionics will call TI structural logic is because, well, that's bias from alpha NT, as in typology, is that with the strategic intellect and the constructing intellect, the INTPs and ENTPs are sort of using TI to construct models. And part of that is you've got a subjective premise, and then you reason it through to see where you end up as a way to sort of test the premise by where you end up. It's sort of like, it's almost like you're trying to do a reductio ad absurdum to see where it leads. And it's like the INTP would say, well, the premise is probably true because look where we end up. Look how it's all consistency. And you get that in typology, where a lot of typology in, say, the Jungian types is you can have a TI argument of, well, look at all of the consistency within the Jungian model. And like, for example, like getting all the definitions opposite. And then you can also bring it in and say, well, this, we also see this when we test it and see the resemblers. And when we say a type will entail these other traits and how they cluster together. And then when we see the people who resemble the types, and then they have those additional traits as well, those predicted traits, that helps to test the system. But so, for example, a TI argument would be a way to see that you've got your definitions right. But this is a TI point of view by looking at how you get them opposite. So when I showed SE, immersing in the present context, uptime, attention outwards, and in time, in the here and now, and then we looked at NI being opposite, downtime and through time. Well, you've got SE and NI as opposites. And that is consistent with Jung's idea that SE and NI suppress each other, but can also work in tandem. So someone who is in the moment can do with a bit of help of the NI guidance. And someone who is completely NI can do with some SE to get in the moment and act in the world and get some reality. So those two work together. So there's an opposition there, but you can also see an opposition between SE and SI, especially in the temperament, where in a response to the artisan, it's like to a danger. It might be for them, it's not danger. This is exciting. This is stimulating. SI, this is dangerous. You've got stabilizing, do it by the book, and you've got improvising there. Well, it's sort of opposite. And then you've got an opposite between SI and NI, between stabilizing, and then developing. So the instinct of SI is like stick with the tried and true. And NI is no, we can change this, we can improve this. People, NFJs, or like objects and systems with NTJs. So there is, you've got these neat oppositions with the irrational functions. And TI would say, well, that's a sort of proof that sort of adds to, that makes the definitions of these irrational functions more convincing, because it's like you've got them in neat opposites and why they should be opposites. Now, when you get to the rational functions, it's a bit not quite as good, but you get predicted. And so you might have say with the TI model, you can predict, based on this, INTJ is going to be awful at FE and have reduced affect display and such and such and such and such. And then you look at the INTJ and you go, okay, I predict that ENTPs and STPs are crap at FI. pardon my language, and it comes through. It's like the predictions at the moment, but that's like you're then testing that against reality, and you're making falsifiable claims, and so and you're looking to falsify it, so it's a little bit more scientific. So the TI version would be all the internal consistency, but it's a way to sort of test the subjectivity. But the subjective part of TI is the root of that TI. It's just that doing the model and all the opposites and that is specific to NTPs going towards construction of systems. TI does not operate like that in STPs. STPs are using TI tactically to think on their feet, to think outside the box in the moment. They're not thinking about consistency. Right then. So yeah, contrarian alternative. I can see the composer that's got to use the TI to get the, like, again, if we're going to use the stuff with the structure, yeah. Again, integration of things. Like, remember Patterson towards that role of getting the prosody and getting the elements together and integrating them. Right, any bad at any in that. If we concentrate on this, so what I would say is, I'm going to explain any polar. Right, so going back to that example, like Patterson doesn't like songs that go all over the place. So I don't think he would like Pet Shop Boys songs. I think Neil Tennant could be like an NFP. So he wouldn't like those songs going all over the place. He wouldn't like West End Girls as a song. He wants a song to like hit a theme and be integrated, have prosody. Let's have a look at that word. I'll do that later. But yeah, prosody, you can look it up. There's various meanings, but it's the meaning of like getting everything integrated. Whereas there is a tendency for any to sprawl, exhibit A. So I can give an example from an ISTP, from NLP. So he would talk about errors, and when he's doing his meta model and the meta model violations, a lot of it sounds like a criticism from a really smart ISTP towards NFPs. And one of the things that John Greener doesn't like is the complex equivalence, which is where it's, the formula would be A means B. Because you did that means you're evil. This means that. Whereas that's what I mean by the complex equivalence. Whereas for ISTP, it's like, no, it doesn't. How does that mean that? And it's like, mean? That is completely different from that. That is apples and oranges. And that, you got a bit of the NE in ISFP, where the NE Achilles heel, where it's like, those two would frequently say, those two situations are apples and oranges. How did you get from there to there? Why don't you just stick to the topic, to the train of thought, where they can follow the NI way of doing it, and going down the rabbit hole, sort of a narrower focus and going deeper, rather than being a mile wide, an inch deep of any. I might argue a foot deep, but not much more. But generally, the NI is looking to go deeper, 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 as Tamsy would say, down the rabbit hole. So, also another way of looking at SE versus NE is that SE being specific to this particular context, whereas NE is going across the contexts and is maybe interpreting something new. So it's like, this is like that. And so it's like an NE person, an NP they know A. They know how A works. They come across B. And it's like, and they understand B in terms of A. And so they're focusing on the commonalities between B and A. But by focusing on the commonalities, they're ignoring the specifics of the context that's B. So any can have the benefit of that it has that shortcut of like finding the connection between A and B and understanding B in terms of A. But SE would maybe take longer, but want to focus in on the specifics of B and not bringing over the baggage of A. And it's like, and they might say, if we use the example of apples and oranges, you only know apples, then you counter an orange, and it's like you're understanding the orange in the term of apples. Whereas for SE, it's like, no, they're completely separate. And then you concentrate on that in itself. Don't concentrate on the commonalities. Whereas the NP is more looking at the commonalities and the connections rather than the specifics. And the NP might be more likely to focus on the connections between A and B and ignore specifics that don't fit. But those specifics that don't fit can be as important or more important than what doesn't fit. And you can get that in typology where it's like the Enneagram people not knowing Jungian type or temperament. And it's like, well, they're missing out because they're just looking at what they know. And if they're just looking for the spectacles of what they already know and ignoring some specific biographical data. So, for example, someone having a certain, no, they're not fixated on that. Maybe it's something in their upbringing or something from a Jungian type. Or maybe even some Keirsey people that in certain instances, they need to know an Enneagram thing where you can have someone who is an ISFP, but they're an ISFP 6, and they can get miscategorized as an ISFJ. And this frequently happens with someone on the channel, Ellie. But what Jonathan came up with, the insight of, well, we know she's a 6, but if she were ISFJ, an ISFJ 6 is extra ISFJ. And the fact that she was in the middle shows that she was like in the middle of ISFP and E6. So frequently that's what you got. If you got someone who's halfway in between ISFP and ISFJ, they're not going to be an ISFJ 6. They'll probably be an ISFP 6. So these other factors and not ignoring them. Right, so that can be the thing of, and so that's why ISFP doesn't like any. It's like the specifics, the idiosyncrasy in this, the actual specifics of the situation, rather than thinking trans-contextually. So it's trans-contextually, trans meaning across, like transnational or transcontinental railroad, where it's just looking at the commonalities, ignore important specifics, whereas SE would look at the specifics of it. And also there's that bit of, don't say that means that. So it's like someone might say, oh, I can't use that name. That's just like that certain Austrian dictator who was very active in the 30s and first half of the 1940s until he died in 1945. Good riddance. But it's like, well, that's like that. That's just like Mr. H. So it's like, that doesn't mean that. So yeah, that's sort of like how that comes through the NE. So it can be an advantage where they want all that prosody and all of that in, say, songwriting, where it's all integrated. And maybe when they really like concentrate, they get into that NI, they're all concentrated, everything's got the prosody, and they're going down that rabbit hole of the NI. But still their main thing is going to be some sensory stimulation, but also introverting. And so, like I said, they're probably the type that would enjoy long walks or long drives on their own with sensory stimulation, and there'll be a certain kind of subjective sensing going on where it's like just the environment and the effect on the person. So yeah, that was it. Part of Romanticism being in the Romanticism paintings of the environment and the way clouds are drawn in the storm, that represents the emotional state of the individual, and it's like one individual lost amongst that landscape. It's like an outer representation of. Right, so that's the sort of best job I can do with ISFP. Let's see if there's some other slides I need to show. I did intuition. I showed that. Again, like there's like some emotion like coming through with that. Like, say you're on a cliff and you've got that storm raging around you. There's like feelings and emotions sort of attached to that sensory input. There's stuff there on, yes, I should have mentioned this way at the start, like the difference between SE and SI. And it's like, so this is why they're so different. And it is sensory instinctum. I mean, gut instincts. It's like with all the other functions, apart from the sensory instinctive functions, you can get a definition by intersecting the idea of verting. So, for instance, you can get to a definition of FI by saying subjective feeling. You can get to a definition of FE by saying empirical feeling. By going towards, like, this is the done thing, that's the affect display, or empirical stuff. You could do the same with TI and TE and NI and NE. You can get to a definition by using subjective and empirical. And subjective for introverting and empirical for extroverting. But for SE and SI, doesn't quite work because if you intersect extroverting with sensing, all you will get is this, like sensory acuity. All you would get is the part of SE that is being in uptime and in, well, you would get, would you get in time? Yeah, you would probably get uptime and in time, but that's it as a definition of SE. Sort of empirical sensing and situational awareness. That would be all you would get for SE by intersecting sensing with extroverting, empiricalizing. Situational awareness, maybe like being in the moment. That's all you would get. Sensory acuity and in the moment. But there's an instinctive aspect there. And so this is like the lessons of Keirsey being passed on to like Linda Bear and Dario Nardi, where you've got, it's not just it's not just sensory acuity. The sensing, the response to the sensing is that it's exciting and freely follow impulses. So there's a motivation involved here as well. Jeff has said, being impulsive is being alive. And Jeff has said, artisans are impulsive and like being that way. In fact, what I should do is I should get my SE sheet that I did with some input from Jeff. So I should have shown this before. I don't know where I'm going to find it. Okay, so I've got my Jungian stuff. So it's not going to be an F for functions. What is that? Have I got? What's this? Oh. No, that's wrong. If you just bear with me, folks, I'll put another slide on screen while I try and find Vanderhoop on SE. While I try and find what I'm looking for. I think what I need to do is I need to search it maybe for Artisan or Jeff. Or SE sheets. Oh, where would I put the... Right. What I... Visual aids. Maybe visual aids. Okay, what I'm going to look for is if it's not in... let's put that there. If it's not in... I had this thing of like... sort of like... Oh, graphics that I would use in multiple... slides common to many events. It might be in there. I've not used this graphic in a while. It's the SE graphic. I've either called it Artisans or SE. I think I would have called it SE. So let's just go up here. Let's see if I have it. Aha! I found the bugger. Right. I've got to get back to events. Sorry for the delay. Psychological categories. Jungian compatible. Bit. Whiteboards. On own. IS types. FISX. Right, and I'm going to put it over here. Right, now that you've taken that on board, here it is. An old sheet. The old sheet, an SE. And once you take that in, I'm going to copy that sheet across to the other types that I'm going to be doing. So you see this about drive to action. There's more going on there than just empirical sensor. More going on there. Particularly important to do SE when I've got three more artisan types to do, and ESFJ and ESTJ that have slot 3 SE. Right. I'll get back to that in a moment. So I'll close that. IS types, ISFP. Right then. So, yearning for impact. So you can see all the emotion. So this is what you get from Keirsey. The main benefit of Keirsey is that you will understand artisans and guardians, and you'll be able to say to yourself, whoa, this SE is more complex. It's like, if you want to understand SE, folks, read the artisans chapter. If you want to understand SI, read the SI chapter. So fast pace, freedom to explore, all these extra elements with SE. Right, whatever we do the hell out of it. I will not be scheduled. Although Jeff didn't say that, but I put that in quotation marks. Win the moment. They're impulsive and like being that way. To them, being impulsive is being alive. Yep. Tangible action, relevant to the moment and current situation. That's what I mean about SE. Specific context. So there's the SE stuff. Yeah, an SI type C impulsive is negative. But I think one person we were typing him, and we asked him, what do you think of the word impulsive? And he said, it's good if the impulse is to work. And we thought, that's pretty STJ. Right, so I'm gonna go now. I think we've covered everything. So plus planes, Keirsey stuff. That's something on the clubs. Like you got one club there and another club there. But this is like, that's an NF and that's an NT, so it doesn't really. Right, but what Van der Hoek meant by impulse here was impulse to habit. Because I know we think of impulse as artisan. There we go. And then he's named the clubs there. What else could they mean? Like ethos is NF. Right. And then this idea of like, there's being in the world, but there's like myself in the world. So it's like that subjective reaction, like going back to that stuff about romanticism. So yeah, if you look up romanticism and romanticism, you'll get an idea of sort of like what I mean by that. So bye-bye, folks.